Good evening, everyone. The board has already met in executive session, and we saluted the flag there. So we're going to have a roll call. Mr. McLaughlin.
Mr. Byrne.
Here.
Ms. Schaefer.
Here.
Mrs. Gray.
Here.
Mr. Salmon.
Here.
Mrs. White.
Here.
Mrs. Richmond.
Here.
Mrs. Korn.
Here.
Mrs. Woldridge.
Here.
Mr. Markarian.
Here.
Mrs. McCune.
Here.
Madam President.
Thank you. So I'd like to draw your attention to the statement of public notice in your agenda. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Education. Adequate notice of time and place of the meeting was provided, and copies of the resolution were forwarded to the official newspapers and posted on the bulletin board of the Board of Education office in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We very much welcome input from the public. There are 2 times during regular meetings that the public is invited to speak. One time is early in the meeting before the board votes, when you may speak about any item that is on tonight's agenda. Towards the end of the meeting, there is another public forum to address any other matter of public concern related to the schools. Please read the statement of public notice in your agenda. Note that this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the district website for public access. He's trying to do April Fool's stuff up here and get me all messed up. Okay, we're up to our student representative, Maddie.
Hello. So the past 2 weeks, I guess, have been pretty slow. We've just been working because we're about to finish the marking period 3 on April 5th. Spring sports have been continuing, so girls lacrosse are undefeated with a 2-0 record, as well as boys lacrosse 2-0. We had Ridge Factor, which is like our talent show, and that went over really well. It was awesome. It had a much better turnout than last year's, and it was just like, it was really fun. And it had some pretty cool acts. There was like mental math, if any of you guys went. Yeah, it was really cool. And yeah, everyone's really just getting ready for spring break and park testing, just getting really excited for that whole week off. And I had come with 2 grievances. First of all, barbecue sauce in the cafeteria. I've had multiple random kids ask for it. I'm pretty sure I can bring that to Aramark. I don't know if that's you guys, but I will put that out there right now. And also, kids are just wondering what's happening to the 2 snow days that like got taken away, if that's going to ever come back. Just a question. If anyone knows.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Are you saying that the barbecue sauce does not exist, or that the quality of the barbecue sauce is subpar?
Apparently there's no barbecue sauce in the cafeteria on chicken finger Wednesdays and Fridays, and it's going to be a problem.
You're having
gonna have a
to
riot
eat
on your
chicken
hands.
fingers with no barbecue sauce?
Yeah. Can you believe it?
Unacceptable. I feel your pain. That's my top priority.
I got grabbed at the cafeteria. There's no barbecue sauce. Mm-hmm. I know. We're being starved.
Okay, so as far as the 2 snow days yet to be used, certainly we hope not to have to use any of them at this point, but it is a little bit complicated because it's part of the teacher's contract. We're in negotiations, so it's not something that we can really mess with at the moment, but
Okay.
I get it.
Thank you.
Okay, the board is going to go down below for the presentation, and you have a copy there.
Mic check. You're good. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for our Board of Education meeting. I'm really excited to introduce our Director of School Counseling, Stephanie Smith, and also Momentarily, you'll be hearing from some of our school principals and Mr. Krause and Mrs. Hudak, so just want to thank them for joining us tonight. I really appreciate them being here, and appreciate your being here, listening to this presentation tonight. It's got some great information, and I'm actually really looking forward to it. So, Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Good evening. Get us set up here. There we go. I am Mrs. Smith, the Director of School Counseling here in Berners Township. Tonight we have a lot of data to cover, a lot of information, so I will move rather methodically and try to keep it as conversational as possible so that we can digest all of this together. The overview for this presentation. First, we will start off with what we're calling a quantitative review of the trends in mental health. So all of the data that's been collected by the counseling staff reflects last year's experiences, so the 2017-2018 school year. We'll review the elementary, middle school, and high school data, then also review district-wide data, specifically home instruction and district-mandated reporting. So any reports to the Department of Child Protection and Permanency, DCP&P, suicide intervention reports, violence prevention reports as well. The next part of the presentation, we will review the qualitative data, so the input from our counseling staff so that they can speak to the quantitative numbers. So we're calling that our professionals' sound bites. And then lastly, we will give an update on SEL programming for this current school year moving forward, and hear directly from the principals at the middle school and the high school. So with no further ado, the trends in mental health. And again, keep in mind that all of this data is reflective of the school year 2017-2018. Starting off with our elementary schools. You'll see on the screen that I've highlighted for you the student to counselor ratio at each of our elementary schools. And so we have one school counselor at each of our elementary schools, and you'll see that the caseload typically is around the 500 area on average, Mount Prospect being the highest, and Oak Street being the smallest caseload with 493. The graph below represents that. I show you these numbers because the school counselors, part of just understanding their role, they are responsible for the individual, group, and counseling delivery for all of those kids, K through 5. And so that's the caseload of students that they're working with every day. So what does an average week look like? I worked with the team to identify the average school counselor week and specifically what they're doing related to the counseling program. So you can see the different categories, and these categories are identified by our national model for school counseling, which is derived from the American School Counseling Association. It's commonly referred to as the ASCA model. So that's the gold standard for school counseling programs in the country. So relative to all the different categories that model explains for a comprehensive school counseling program, where are our services in the elementary world? You'll see that the elementary team has identified that the largest category of how they spend their time, how they use their time, is in what we call responsive services. So those are responding to situations that might come through your door on the daily. So not necessarily what you had planned. So the perfect plan might go in a different direction every day. That's okay, that varies, that's part of the job. But the majority of your time during the day are working on student issues, parent calls, concerns, anything that teachers refer to you or administrators come to you and need your assistance with. After that, the majority of time at the elementary school counselor position is based on the delivery of core curriculum. And so the elementary staff, they do have an elementary counseling curriculum that's written, and we'll get further into those numbers in a bit. But that's where they spend almost about a quarter of their time overall in any given week. After that is individual student counseling, group counseling, any indirect services, so consultations with different agencies and different staff members, and then what we call fair share responsibility. So really just supporting the school and the larger school network and programs. Group counseling is a big part of elementary school counseling. So our school counselors have groups that run every week, and so a group might be based on any type of need that students present. It might be on family changes, social skills, anything related to peers, academic, and social and emotional skill building as well. On average, the number of groups throughout the year per counselor rests at 20, and the average number of students in each group is at 6. The total groups per counselor is 80, and participants by counselor is 120. So that equates to about 480 students total across the district that are participating in counseling groups. Participation in counseling groups is completely optional, and so it's really a family decision in collaboration with teachers and school counselors. And it's important to note here in talking with the staff that this does not reflect any groups that may pop up in an ad hoc fashion, just dependent upon need, or lunch bunch groups, as counselors call them frequently, that may casually be convened to solve a more immediate problem and not necessitate several weeks of meeting in order to build some certain skills. So keep that in mind overall. So we've discussed groups, and like I mentioned, classroom lessons accounts for about 25% of a counselor's time in any given week at the elementary level. So this really breaks down for you the lessons by grade level. And again, this is a snapshot, one example. This can vary and does vary throughout each week and each year as the goals are created and the curriculum is written. But in general, you will see that 73 total lessons on average from every school counselor are facilitated across grades K through 5. What this does not include are any, again, ad hoc lessons that may be devised based on teacher requests, administrator requests, or just needs that counselors see throughout the year. For example, one of the counselors shared with me that they were completing a certain project of mini lessons to address some social skills and social and emotional learning skills as well, related to relationship building and self-management and emotional regulation. And so they completed about 25 different topics within SEL across 4 sections, so it equated to 100 different mini lessons that they did throughout the year. This is the visual representation via a pie chart that I just shared with you. So this is really easy to see the grade distribution. You'll see that kindergarten and first grade is actually equal in terms of the total amount of time spent on lessons. And then a slight increase there for second grade. And then as you move up, 3rd through 5th grade, you'll also see an increase in the amount of time and the amount of lessons per grade level. You'll also notice here that a trend, the 3rd through 5th grade, they're somewhat similar. About 20% of the lessons are dedicated to those grade levels. Again, some common lesson topics in the curriculum are self-esteem, bullying, empathy, conflict resolution, as well as stress management. So that gives a picture for you of the use of time of the elementary school counseling program. And with no further ado, we will move on to the middle level program. So the data that we are about to review for the middle level, what does it not include? So it's just important to keep this in mind. It does not include large group meetings. So anytime an entire grade level may come and convene in the auditorium, or for any large group assembly or initiative that's happening, this data is not reflective of that. Any presentations to grade levels, transition activities, classroom lessons that counselors collaborate with the health department at the school to facilitate. Any groups, we just discussed groups at the elementary level, so this data does not reflect that. What it does reflect are the individual sessions when students are coming through the door. So like I explained, those responsive services, things that you don't necessarily plan for, and then also for individual student meetings that you do in fact plan for, this is what we're talking about. So we're talking about that individual level, not large group or small group necessarily. You will see on your left-hand side, the total class sizes. So when I'm referring to these large group activities, do keep in mind that the counselors are making FaceTime with students and the number of students that you see on the screen there. So the total walkthroughs in terms of individual students seen, you'll see the numbers on the screen and the number of visits to the counseling office. So any one student can obviously have more than one visit to the counseling office. The pie chart reflects the percentage of students seen by grade level. You will see a trend of pooling resources at the 6th grade level for last year. So indicative of greater focus in that area, the 6th grade transition, it was big last year. The number of visits by month, you can see the graph on the screen. So at the very beginning of the year, we have a peak with high numbers, a concentration there, and then the decline throughout the year. You'll see at the end of the year when testing is heavy, harder to pull students out for those individual meetings. And then you'll see a bit of a peak in April when, again, those transition activities are occurring for 8th to 9th grade. So this screen shows you the number of visits to the counselor per student. So the largest number of student visits for any one student dropped last year from 56 visits for one student to 26 was the highest. So that would have been now year 2016-17 to 2017-18. So you'll see at the right-hand side of the screen that 26 was the highest for any one student. But in general, the majority of their students saw their counselor between 1 to 3 times, individual sessions, and 127 students saw their counselor 4 or more times. The type of program that the students are in when they are seeing their counselor, the vast majority are general education students, and so we have, with our counseling program, a nice collaboration with the Department of Special Services, and so the case managers and counselors obviously work in sync and have a good collaborative relationship to support the students, and so you'll see that in the school counseling office, it's more likely to see a general education student as a first stop. So while the students are with their counselor, the direct services, you will see the spread on the screen. It's relatively equal between each category. You'll notice that the green is other, and other can encompass anything from dealing with a situation with a peer, escalating or de-escalating anger if necessary, any attendance, behavior concerns, referrals from teachers, from parents, and general check-ins as well. So the red portion you see is highlighted for mental health. So now let's break that down. So the visits for mental health specifically in terms of students showing symptoms of depression or symptoms of anxiety, you'll see that the vast majority of the counselors indicated that they were showing symptoms of anxiety. And then you can see the numbers on the screen for symptoms of depression and then school refusal as well. So again, that's zooming into the portion of the previous chart that showed the mental health. So we just looked at the data for the school counseling program. So now we'll talk about the William Annan Student Assistance Program. And so that is our SACs, our Student Assistant Counselors. Say that 3 times fast, it's pretty hard. So you'll see that overall the referrals for student assistance counselors are over 200. And so on the very top chart that you'll see there, the breakdown of those students coming to see their SACs, it reflects more than one visit. And so you'll see that most of the visits to see the SAC are related to mental health concerns. Substance abuse numbers are there, as well as any other personal, social, emotional, or developmental issue that might bring a student to a SAC, school refusal, and then anything related to HIB, harassment, intimidation, and bullying cases as well. And again, some visits from students may be in more than one category. This is the pie chart graphic that reflects the previous screen. And so just note that for the other category, this does include any family or friend concerns, social skills, behavior, teacher referrals, etc. So our SAC screenings and placements, you can see the past 3 years of data there in terms of emergency psychiatric screenings, IOP, which is intensive outpatient, and psychiatric hospitalization. And then the right-hand side of that chart reflects the drug and alcohol, IOP, intensive outpatient, and then residential treatment as well. You will notice that emergency psychiatric screenings actually stayed the same from the prior year. Psychiatric IOP, there was an increase, as well as psychiatric hospitalization. It is important to note that the everyday work of a SAC at both the middle school and high school levels, particularly when it comes to screenings and placements, involves a lot of work with community agencies, disclosure agreements with therapists, doctors, hospitals, anything that the family approves, high collaboration with the family to make sure that a care plan in the school for reentry is solid, as well as just communication while students are placed. Students sent for drug testing, as recorded in the Student Assistance Program, you will see that for William Annan last year, 12 were sent, 9 were negative, and 3 were positive, and there were no refusals. For William Annan voluntary random drug testing, there were 41 tests, and all were negative. No refusals. A refusal, you will note, is an automatic positive. So that concludes the William Annan middle level program, and we will progress on to Ridge High School. So similarly for William Annan, to frame the data that we're about to look at for you, it does not include large group meetings such as assemblies related to grade level topics, senior mechanics, juniors navigating post-secondary options, small group meetings, any classroom modules, or individual conferences that are preset. So particularly for a senior meeting, junior conferences, scheduling meetings. This is really reflective of the students who walk into your doors, responsive services, or individual counseling sessions. Again, on the screen on the lower left-hand side, you will see that the total class sizes, and so when I'm referring to those large group meetings, you know how many students that the counselors are making FaceTime with when they are occurring. So individual students seen, you'll see the numbers up on the screen, and then the number of visits that are reflective per those students. The chart at the bottom, you will see the percentage of students by grade, and so the highest being the seniors, and then 11th grade, and then 9th grade, followed by 10th grade. The trends of visits by month, you can note that 8 out of 11 months have visits nearing 500 visits a month, if not higher. And you'll see that towards the beginning of the year, there's a peak, towards mid-year, there's a peak, and then a tapering off towards the end of the year, very similarly to the middle level counseling program. So the type of program that the students are in, similarly to William Annan, most of the students are in general education. The design and layout for collaboration with the Office of Special Services in the suite is very nice. They're all right there together, working collaboratively, and so it's not uncommon for students with specialized education to also see their case manager, but this is more reflective of students who are seeing their counselor. So it's important to note. That being said, school counselors serve all students, and so that is a firm belief of all school counselors. So the number of visits to the counselor per student, the majority of students who came to the counselor visited between 1 and 5 times, and 17 students visited for a total of 287 times. So what that will say to you is obviously that there is a lot of time dedicated to chronic issues, and so chronic concerns and regular visits from a smaller population of students. Continuing the analysis of the school counseling program and the direct services and that breakdown, you'll see that a large majority of the meetings and direct services with students are related to academic and post-secondary issues, followed by mental health, substance abuse, and social issues as well. I do want to note that post-secondary, college planning, whatever your path is after high school, that is not a mutually exclusive issue with mental health. And so one impacts the other, and it's very common to have, discussions about both and just how you are, doing when you're planning your post-secondary ventures. So it's just important to note that they are not mutually exclusive, and they very often go hand in hand with one another. That being said, most of the reasons why students walk in the door are academic in nature. So if we zoom in, like we did for WAMS, to the mental health portion of the previous pie chart, you'll see the further breakdown for mental health. The majority of the mental health visits were stemming from symptoms of anxiety, followed by symptoms of depression, any crisis management, school refusal, and substance abuse. So moving on to our Ridge Student Assistance Program with the SACs at Ridge. The total number of students seen, you will see the decrease on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side for the average number of visits per student, you'll see that it's relatively the same as the year prior. So again, reflective of the trend that we previously talked about, how even though there were less students seen, they still have a similar average number of visits per counselor. So the students are coming back, and there's a lot of work to be done with a smaller group of students, but the same amount of visits per student. And so again, chronic concerns. For the student assistance program at Ridge, reasons for visits, you can see the numbers on the screen as related to the previous few years as well. So mental health is the number one reason to see a SAC, followed by substance abuse. There are some students who are coming for combined, either one, so those have been noted. Other, as we discussed, can be anything else related to developmental issues or social and emotional in general, school refusal, and any cases related to a HIB case. This is the chart that reflects, it reflects the previous screen that we just discussed. And so this is the graph form. And so you'll see that mental health is the majority of the reason why students visit their SAC. And again, some visits may fall into more than one of these categories. The Ridge information about screenings and placements, you can see that there was a decrease in the emergency psychiatric screenings. Psychiatric intensive outpatient, IOP, stayed the same from the year prior, and hospitalizations did increase. Another increase in drug and alcohol, IOP, as well as residential treatment for drug and alcohol abuse. For students sent for drug testing, there are 29 total suspicion-based tests sent. 14 were negative and 15 were positive. Of those 15, 2 were refusals. So again, if there's a refusal, then that's an automatic positive. For voluntary random drug testing, 15 were tested and 15 were negative. And that concludes the portion of the presentation with our Ridge counseling. We will move on to look at the data from home instruction district-wide. So the total last year for home instruction, there were a total of 69 students receiving home instruction, reflective of 126 rounds of home instruction. So each time that you apply and are approved for home instruction, that counts as another round. By school, the majority of students on home instruction were from Ridge High School, followed by WAMS, so high trends in the secondary. And then by grade, you can see that the top 3 grades were 11th, 9th, and then a tie between 8th and 10th grade. So again, the upper levels. Home instruction approval type and the reason for the approval. The approval type was a vast majority from our district physician, and the reason was largely psychological, followed by medical. For home instruction, the program and the tutoring services themselves, so the educational program of students on home instruction, most were from the general education population. However, you will see that the numbers are pretty close with students who are receiving specialized instruction and are on home instruction. The tutoring services themselves, the majority, 60%, are Berners Township teachers providing the tutoring, followed by about 40% of third-party providers. So if a student is in a hospital and they have a contracted service with a tutoring agency, that would be an example of a third-party provider. For district-mandated reporting, including suicide intervention reports, violence prevention reports, and like I said earlier, the DCP&P referrals. The district totals for suicide, violence, and abuse reports decreased from the previous year from 100 to 70 total across the district. And again, this is K-12. The totals by school you will see on the screen there. The most are from Ridge High School, followed by WAMS, and then about 5 from the elementary total for suicide intervention reports. This was an increase from Ridge the year before and a decrease in WAMS from the year before. The next slide is the visual graph format of what we just saw. Again, higher numbers at the secondary level. Moving on to violence prevention reports, the totals by school you will see there. 1 for WAMS and 2 for Oak Street last year. And you'll see the differences in the number from the year prior. And again, graph format. The Department of Child Protection and Permanency, DCP&P referrals, the totals by school, as all school counselors are mandated reporters, as is everyone here at the school. You can see the totals district-wide, K through 12. The most, again, at Ridge, followed by a tie with WAMS and Mount Prospect. And then Oak Street and Cedar Hill also had reports last year. This is a decrease in Ridge, bless you, decrease in Ridge from the year before, and WAMS was steady. This is the graph format of the slide that we just saw. That concludes part 1 of our quantitative data. So we will move on with no further ado to our qualitative sound bites. And so asking the counselors across the district to speak to this data. So what are the trends that you are seeing in your office? And how can you really illustrate what comes to mind, generally speaking, when we're talking about the trends in mental health? And so some of this can be really hard to define. And some of the work itself is not quantitative, although the numbers and the trends are vitally important. It is important to also just speak anecdotally as a professional about the trends that you're seeing, what you're most proud of your students, and what also concerns you. K through 12, these conversations were had, and so I will go through and again represent the voice of the staff to put some of their thoughts behind the data that we just reviewed. Starting with our elementary schools. So who are we that are providing the input? Again, there are 4 school counselors at the elementary level, 1 at each. On the screen, you'll see that when discussing the trends in mental health, the majority of the counselors' common reporting that they saw across all 4 schools is an increase in cell phone use at the younger ages, which is also bringing in different issues in school, the more cell phone use and exposure that you're seeing outside of school. Most of the work with counselors that they're doing with students is in discovering appropriate coping skills and helping to regulate behavior and emotions, conflict resolution development, and they're also seeing an increase in anxiety, which is consistent with the numbers that we just reviewed. Students are also expressing being stressed about academics, and again, having immediate influence on our students. In terms of positive trends that they are seeing, Overwhelmingly, the counselors at each school reflected on how students are kind to one another, that they love helping each other out, that they love coming forward, not just at the beginning of the year, but consistently throughout the year. They're impressed with their students' wide range of interests that they have, just life in general. They're seeing a lot of passion in our kids and interest overall. The counselors also commented on seeing all of the work with the curriculum and the classroom lessons. They're seeing their kids utilize these skills that they're teaching, particularly character education habits, and they're seeing it in different areas and different interactions with one another. And they're also seeing more students coming forward with issues and wanting to help their community, their school community, and each other. At the middle school level, there are 7 staff members between SACs and school counselors, 4.5 school counselors and 2.5 SACs. And so when the middle school team met to reflect on the trends in mental health last year and to put their words behind the data, they saw that a lot of their students are developing their resiliency skills and learning at the middle level how to manage problems in healthy ways, making mistakes and growing from them, learning how to cope with change, be it a change in a friend group or a change in academics that they're experiencing. A lot of counseling meetings also revolved around organizational skills at the middle level, and it was a big topic that came up for a lot of students. Conflict resolution and brainstorming solutions to issues is common at the middle level. And they also shared the same concern at the elementary level, which was concerns about YouTube exposure and screen time overall. Positive trends and growth that they're seeing in their students, their kids have a willingness to ask for help, overwhelmingly want to help one another, are not afraid to come forward and talk with someone, and genuinely concern and care for their kids. The kids really look out for one another, to quote a counselor. Ridge High School, 10 staff members total, 8 school counselors and 2 SACs. The trends that you are seeing at the high school, you'll see a pattern here from elementary, middle, and high, but the kids are learning in high school still how to cope with disappointment, learning how to deal with stress and stress avoidance. They're growing and becoming self-confident young adults and developing self-esteem. Counselors can also speak to social media, creating added pressure and this feeling that everybody knows everything and it's hard to keep up, that somebody else's life is perfect, and that's making you feel a certain way as a student. Counselors are also seeing mental health trends surrounding sometimes what's all or nothing thinking. You know, I'm not good enough, I'm good enough one day, and it can be difficult for students to process some things with that type of thinking. Students are also developing their communication skills with one another, with adults in their life, and how to handle when a peer has hurt them or when they have made a mistake and hurt someone else. They're also seeing trends in students with performance anxiety in school and also in sports. The positive trends that the counseling staff can speak to, asking for help, being open, a willingness to share who they are and how they're growing, willing to strategize and discover different tools to use them. The students are reflective and they're accessing outside help and can easily build rapport with staff. Students reaching out for help is incredibly important, and counselors are feeling like the stigma of going to see a counselor to ask for help is starting to diminish at Ridge High School. My students are unbelievable. They are always willing to support one another, was a quote from a counselor. So we have reviewed a lot of numbers in the data. I also have given you anecdotal sound bites from the staff to paint the picture of the trends in mental health, K through 12, of the different levels. So it begs the question, what is an SEL update for this current year? So the social and emotional programming update for this current school year, because we just reflected on last school year, keep that in mind, is as follows. I will start out with the district reminders and updates, and then we will hear from Mrs. Hudak at the middle school and Mr. Kraus at the high school related to various projects. So district-wide, different initiatives and projects that we're working on are up there on the screen. I have linked our first 2 social and emotional learning updates for you to just reflect on for this past year. This is our 3rd installment of an update to the public. We have all of our staff, some highlights that you'll see on the screen, have the ability to participate in a staff college with youth mental health first aid, and all administrators over the summer were trained on this. From the counseling department specifically, we are implementing the alignment to the ASCA national model, as I mentioned earlier. Counseling groups across all levels, including at the high school, are being explored. We have our elementary counseling curriculum writing this summer, and so I showed you all the different lessons and the topics that are done at the elementary level, and so there will be curriculum writing approved for this summer with the elementary team. Also, health curriculum writing. We have strengthened community partnerships with regular meetings with key stakeholders, including the health department and the municipal alliance, and worked on a couple different projects at Ridge High School with that team over there related to mental health. Increasing communication with the counseling department specifically via newsletters to families, which include social and emotional resources. And we also dedicated a lot of our resources and time with the district goal of social and emotional learning. What is that? How are we tackling that across all components of the school experience, so curricular, instruction, programming. The 3 professional in-service days were dedicated to this year, and so to recap for you, and again I've hyperlinked some of the work more in depth on the previous slide, but in November at the secondary levels for William Annan and for Ridge, we convened the staff into small groups to hear them and to start with the adults at those buildings and to particularly hear their direct feedback in terms of what they need to focus on social emotional learning, what that means to them within their classroom and their pedagogy, and also what it means in terms of a culture at each of those schools. In January, we worked very hard to provide an in-service opportunity involving community members in different sessions, breakouts at both schools, a vendors fair at the Ridge High School, which involved over a dozen different organizations in this community and over 20 businesses also donating to the program as well, all surrounded around social emotional learning, some of it explicit skills that the staff learn that they can then turnkey and bring into their classroom. And some of it, too, just wellness overall for staff. And so those are 2 big days at Williams and Ridge as part 2 for in-service. The third in-service day was really about getting to action. And so hearing the feedback, providing a day of direct response to teacher needs in January, and then March looked like convening of different committees. And so that's where I will leave Mr. Kraus and Mrs. Hudak to provide further detail in terms of that work. But as we continue with social emotional learning and different updates, it's also important to point out that because social emotional learning is a district goal, the supervisors are also working with their teachers and thinking forward to next year for different goals that they want to set for next year's professional development plans. An option for them is to also focus on social emotional learning, and supervisors are exploring how they can support that, particularly with curricular and instructional competencies. So I also will highlight, before we move on to the middle school and high school level, some elementary school work. I have linked at the bottom of this slide an in-depth version from a presentation to the board in November where the principals came and spoke directly about each of the specific programs in their schools. And so instead of reiterating all that, I have linked the presentation and then highlighted for you some of the work overall that's happening related to character education and also, partnerships specifically with the United Way at Mount Prospect, book talk, staff appreciation, and again, counseling curriculum in small groups as well. Before I pass the mic on to Mrs. Hudak, I also want to highlight that another initiative that we recently rolled out across 4th through 12th grade were the resource cards for our students. And so should you be in a position of needing to reach someone after school hours and want to reach out for help and just want to be reminded of those resources, we solicited the help of our amazing kids to send that message. And so when we're giving a card to students, it's important that that message really speaks to them and means something, and that we're saying, that it matters, especially at Ridge High School. And so Our kids had a vision for this. They did an amazing job creating a video, and so I do just want to give a kudos and public credit to the Ridge Productions team of kids that made this message under the leadership of Mr. Ortega. And so I'll take a minute to show you the rollout for that before we transition on to the middle school.
Being a teenager can be overwhelming. It feels like we need to be the perfect students, the perfect teammates, the perfect versions of ourselves, all the time. Sometimes we feel out of breath, exhausted from pushing ourselves beyond our breaking point. But it's hard to take the time to slow down when we feel a constant pressure to keep moving forward. When life stressors pile up, there's an expectation to handle them entirely on our own. However, it shouldn't be this way. Struggling socially or emotionally is too much for one person to carry by themselves. Whether it is you, a loved one, or a classmate who's going through hard times, reaching out for guidance is not a sign of weakness, but one of resilience. There will always be someone who wants to help you get back on your feet. Support systems exist all around us, from talking about your day with a friend to visiting your school counselor for support. There are so many people who truly care about your well-being, and no one should ever face their burdens alone.
Hi, I'm Mr. Gillikin, one of 2 student assistance counselors here at Ridge High School.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Anthony, one of the student assistance counselors here at Ridge High School.
We have a new initiative. We're rolling out a business card that has many resources and numbers for you to access.
I have the privilege and pleasure of speaking with kids all day long, and I just want to say that I'm here to support you and that I care.
And at this time, I will pass the mic to Mrs. Hudak for an update at the middle level.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. So as Ms. Smith had alluded to, the district has a goal that is focused on SEL. As a building at William Annan, we began our work earlier last year on trying to identify ways that we can work on professional development that were unique to our students, staff, and our administrators' needs. Our professional development committee at the middle school began looking at potential implementation programs to identify ways in which we can meet the middle level learner, both academically, but also more importantly, emotionally. So what we decided to do is partner with the United Way and the College of St. Elizabeth in doing an overall culture and climate survey. Why this was important? It was the first time that the middle school, in the 17 years that I've been there, did an evaluation of its overall program, including all of those key stakeholders, parents, teachers and staff, and most importantly, the students. This evaluation or this analysis occurred in November, where we distributed to many of you in the community, both the parents, the first survey, the data pieces came in, asking you questions about the culture and climate of the middle school based upon your child's perceptions. Since the students are a captive audience at the middle school, we used one of our morning meeting times to also administer a survey that was created by the United Way in the state of New Jersey to them. And additionally, the staff also participated in that same survey. In addition to that survey, we were recognized through our character education program in our work as promising practices by a Character Award for the Day of Giving and Holocaust Day. This year was something new that we created for all of our middle schoolers who are often looking for opportunities to give back to their community, and we created a service learning packet. This packet was distributed to all of parents in the early fall, and it's housed currently in our archives at the bottom of our Friday folder blast, where parents can go in and see a list of over 18 community resources that welcome the opportunities for middle school students to volunteer. It also goes through a process where a middle schooler can come and meet with their school counselor to reflect on that volunteer practice and the services and the benefit both to themselves and to the school community. We've organized several book talks this year, both with our staff and with our parents. The one most recently that was publicized was Artificial Maturity. We have mental health curriculum lessons that we are expanding on all of our SEL topics. At the middle school, we do curriculum rewrites with our character education committee yearly to make sure that we are keeping updated with the trends for students as their needs change. Developmentally, we've had lots of conversations how the 6th grader is very different than an 8th grader, and the character education skills and lessons that you're teaching 6th through 8th are very different based upon their grade level and their developmental responsiveness to those presentations. We've had speakers through our PTO this year, Ryan Halligan's story. We've had last year, we also had an FBI cyber unit come in, and we're going to continue to plan opportunities with bringing in speakers from the community as well as the nation. At the middle school, we've had morning meetings twice a month. They're every other Thursday. We've had this for several years now, where we have an adapted schedule where we spend 30 minutes in an instructional program solely focused on SEL and character education. We have group and individual counseling meetings, as well as SEL lessons combined and included in our health programs. And we have more specific programming efforts that can be found based around our culture and climate initiative, which we're in the middle of, from the presentation on November 26th that is linked here. So the survey results from the Climate and Culture Initiative were huge for us. And so the way that it analyzed it is it gave our strengths and our opportunities. For those of you who had children at Mount Prospect, this was something that Mount Prospect had gone through. They're now in their 4th year. We are just beginning at the middle school. And so what this allowed us to do is to look at the data and to identify out of all the skill sets that the students, parents, and teachers were surveyed on, which were the priorities for us to work with. You can certainly see from the data that we're presenting that there are trends, and I can tell you that the trends were not something that were surprising to any of us at the middle school, whether they were staff, parents, or students. And you can see some of them are actually confirming to one another. So the students identified several strengths at the middle school is that they feel hopeful about their future, that they feel very connected to the staff and the teachers at the middle school. They also feel like they understand the methods in which they need to address any type of bullying situations or events that happen. The staff, they feel like they have an extremely supportive environment collegially, and the students and parents. And they also feel strongly that the students know how to respond to bullying. And the parent strengths, they felt like there's positive parent involvement, and they also feel like they support the staff. So summary of opportunities are those areas where they are suggesting that you begin to look for ways to create plans and initiatives to improve those areas. The students identified that they wanted to have more decision-making in shaping their environment. They wanted to have more of a voice. In addition, they wanted to have more pride about the school. Staff opportunities, they talked about a more effective discipline program being more consistently school-wide and school-based. In addition, they wanted supportive leadership and positive recognition. And the parents identified opportunities as students shaping their environment, as well as student pride, which goes hand in hand with what the students were also identifying in their survey. So where do we go from here? Student groups have been identified by staff, and students will be notified their participation in these student groups in the next weeks to come. And so the United Way in St. Elizabeth asks you to take a tiered approach where you bring in all those stakeholders and give them an actual voice. And so we have established grade level groups, 6th, 7th, and 8th, with a core group of students that will be invited in monthly to meet with their school counselors and to go over their data. And so we want the students to unpack the data, identify the trends, and explain to us why they feel that their peers identified the areas of strengths and the areas of opportunities, and we want their suggestions to really be the implementation program for us moving forward. How do we give you more of a voice? What does that look like? What opportunities can we create? How can we encourage you to be involved with student pride? What things will get you more engaged within the middle school environment? In addition, we plan to disseminate and elicit parent feedback as well, where we will bring parents in prior to the end of the school year. The PTO and I are currently working on to figure out a way in which we can manipulate our schedules so that we can invite parents in and do a similar unpacking of that information. If not, at least coming in and providing us their feedback and their shared information about why they felt the areas of opportunities needed to be worked on, and maybe what the parental suggestions are based upon feedback that they're hearing from their children. My wonderful staff and I have been working very hard over the course of the last 2 in-service days, where we've really been honing in on the areas of opportunities from their standpoint of view, focusing on positive leadership and morale and what does that look like, and also being able to provide an effective discipline structure that they're invested in building wide. And so, as I had alluded to before, we had worked the last faculty meeting and in-service day breaking into small groups of 12 or less with our teachers and allowing them to have really honest discussions about what it is they needed from the administration, what suggestions that they had, and what actual solutions they could provide for these areas of opportunities. And the goal of those conversations, as I had shared with the staff, was the solutions based are coming from you, and together we will work on implementing those solutions once we create a plan together to cohesively move forward. And so there's a lot of work, as you can imagine, with 190 staff members, getting all of them to narrow down what they feel the best solutions are to create that implementation plan, which will not, of course, begin until next year. Professional development and training opportunities are certainly something that was the impetus for this, and our goal is to find specialized programs and trainings that meet the unique needs of our students here, as well as the unique needs of our teachers. This is a 3-year commitment for us. We are still in year 1 with the United Way in the College of St. Elizabeth, and we will continue to work with them. We meet monthly with them. We have a consultant that comes in. We have a core group of people, and every month she meets with us to talk about our data and to assist us with an unbiased view of where she suggests we go next. It's that Italian in me. It's all over the place. Mr. Kraus, thank you for your time.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Hudak and Mrs. Smith. Before I get into the rotating drop visits that we did, because that's the majority of the presentation that I'm making here tonight, let me just talk a little bit about what has come out of our in-service days this year. And it's really the committees that have been formed for SEL purposes. We have one umbrella committee, which is our Ridge Culture and Climate team, formerly known as the School Safety Team. That will be an umbrella organization for 3 other committees that we have, the Culture and Climate Committee, Character Development, and Staff Appreciation. These are things that our staff has signed up for and want to be a part of, and we are in the process of coordinating that with liaisons between the umbrella organization, which is tasked by the NJDOE, and our 3 school-based committees that came out of our in-service days. In addition to that, obviously I've spoken to this before, that we're trying to create beautification efforts around the school, some of which I've talked about before, but I know Mrs. Smith has made some great efforts here in our counseling suite to sort of soften the touch in there, provide a more friendly, inviting environment, and she's done a great job doing that. I may have spoken this before, but our freshman orientation committee is now creating a program whereby we want our whole freshman class, incoming freshman class, to be here for a 4-hour period versus splitting the class in 2-hour chunks. That has been done in the past. Our committee is comprised of about 12 or 13 staff members creating lessons for students and things they're going to need to know when they get to Ridge. That'll be helpful not only in terms of technology, but skills and SEL competencies. So we're looking to do that and roll that out in late August. We're working with Project Citizen on a common lounge, and they're going to propose something to us in terms of a design through Mrs. Ward and her Project Citizen group. So that's in the works as well. We are going to look at doing monthly homerooms for character-based education and SEL programming, sort of like an advisory period, where we want the whole school involved in that program and different themes per month that'll be delivered through the students to the students. Recently, we did a survey through our counseling office about doing school-based groups. That hasn't been done since I've been here. I talked to Mrs. Smith about that. We talked to our school, SACS. They put out a survey. We got a tremendous response from our students about doing school-based groups, sort of like they do in the elementary schools and the middle schools. And so that is in the process of taking off in terms of students wanting to get involved, wanting to have groups, whether it's something like families of divorce or some other thing that may have gone on in their lives, and that's starting as we speak. We still have our effective school solutions that provide excellent supports for us. They're a great resource here in the building, someone we can go to when we have issues and things that come up. Their input is invaluable to us. And then lastly, last on this bulleted list is the rotating drop schedule that I guess has come up years past. We actually went out in late January and early to mid-February and visited 4 schools because that is a culture and climate piece within a school, and I saw firsthand what kind of effect that can have. The way I described it when I came back from a lot of the visits was these schools that we went to visit, and I'll get into this more specifically in a minute, there seemed to be an overall sense of calmness in the building, and I think I can attribute that, at least in my opinion, to the schedule itself. When you're running an 8 or 9 period day and you're running 42 to 45 minute classes, there is just constant transition throughout the day. And I think what happens, students sit down, they open their books, they have instruction, the bell rings, they're moving on. I think what happens when you have a block type schedule, whether it's a rotating drop, I'll discuss that more specifically, or a day 1, day 2 schedule, and again, I'll get into that more specifically, you have less transitions between classes. Less transitions means students are in classes for a longer period of time, less movement in the building. I think, in my opinion, of what I've seen, it creates an overall sense of calmness. So to continue on that, and to continue on the rotating drop visits, and I call them block scheduling visits because rotating drop is a specific type of schedule. We went out, myself, a few administrators, groups of students, and staff members to schools that have 2 of the schools, West Windsor, Plainsboro North, and Chatham, have what's called a rotating drop schedule, which is 6 periods a day, with 2 classes dropping out. And then we went to see Montgomery High School and Hunterdon Central, which have a day 1, day 2 schedule, which is 4 classes one day, 4 classes the next, on an every other day basis. I know Maddie is in the audience. She was with us on 2 of those visits to West Windsor and Hunterdon Central, and I remember her getting on the bus after West Windsor, and her quote was, "That was fun," right? You said it. I know you did, and I remember that. So, without anything further, and it was great to have her and the students with us. The schools we visited that had a rotating drop schedule, West Windsor, Plainsboro North, and Chatham. Now, West Windsor has had that schedule in place for the better part of 12 to 14 years. Same thing with Chatham, okay? They transferred over, both schools, from an 8-period day, which is different from us, 9-period day. That type of schedule has 6 classes meet per day with 2 classes dropping out. So each class will meet 3 times in a 4-day cycle, with 2 classes dropping out and 2 dropping back in. The periods are about 55 to 60 minute long, depending on the school day of the school, and there is a unit lunch where everyone eats lunch at the same time. Now, to compare that to a day 1, day 2, or sometimes called an AB day at Hunterdon Central and Montgomery, you have 4 classes a day. Those classes are anywhere from 80 to 85 minutes long. You have a unit lunch as well, and those classes alternate every other day. So if I have math on day 1, I won't have it on day 2, but the following day I'll have math again. So in any 2-day sequence, you're having math for 80 minutes, but just for 1 day, not 40 minutes each day, okay? So you're gonna get your 8 classes in, but over a 2-day period. So when we did this, we had 2 cohorts of groups going. And each cohort got to visit each type of schedule. So for instance, I know Maddie was in the cohort 1 with us. And we went to West Windsor, Plainsboro North, where they had a rotating drop schedule. And then we went to Hunterdon Central, where they had, a day 1, day 2 schedule. So they got to see each one. The first cohort had 4 students, 2 seniors, a junior and a sophomore with us, and had 6 teachers going. Cohort 2 went to see Chatham, rotating drop, and Montgomery, day 1, day 2. 3 students, a senior, a junior, and a sophomore, and 8 teachers in that cohort. So you had 10 staff members, or 10 individuals in cohort 1, 11 in cohort 2. In addition to, I know Ms. Fox was with us on these visits, as was Ms. Orr, our special services supervisor, K-6 through 12. So we had some administrators there. In addition to myself, I was on every one of these visits. Departments represented: math, social studies, English, science, world language, phys ed and health, performing arts, special education. I think we had a good gamut of individuals with us across all those disciplines. Now, the formats of our visits were relatively the same, and that's a credit to the schools that we visited. And as a matter of fact, Chatham had a prearranged packet that they gave us because they have so many schools visiting them over the years for their schedule that it was like old hat to them, I can tell you. But really what we did is we got the group together, students and staff members and administrators who were there. We got together with our cohort and the administrators from the school we visited, and we sat down and sort of had a discussion for about 35 to 40 minutes. They answered certain questions for us. They gave an outline of what we were going to do that day, when their unit lunchtime was, look-fors and things that might happen at that particular school, and any questions that teachers or students might have had in advance that could be answered. After that initial meeting, we had breakout sessions with teachers who either met with their subject matter equivalent, math with math, world language with world language, or if a teacher wasn't available, they met with a subject area supervisor. You know, if a science teacher wasn't available, then our teacher met with the science supervisor who may have been there. Our Ridge students would shadow a student from the visited school with the same grade level. Any administrators that were on the visits, we hooked up with the administrators at those schools and picked their brain, elicited information, did a walkthrough of the building, and then everyone was able to observe the unit lunch during that time, and students were able to sit and eat with their visiting students. And then after the unit lunch, we would have a debrief session in a large conference room where, you know, questions that might have come up, things that weren't thought about earlier could have been answered. And that involves students and teachers and administrators alike. Here are some of the statistics of the schools we visited, and we wanted to do it in relation to our school. You can see the enrollments across the top of the screen, Ridge being the second largest. 100 Central, enormous school. As a matter of fact, they have 2 school buildings there. We got the map of the school. We also elicited information about total classrooms because we wanted to compare our total classrooms to the classrooms of these schools and then sort of back out classrooms from things that would leave us with regular, unrestricted classrooms. Because if you recall, when our scheduling consultant here, Elliot Merenblum, you know, our unrestricted classrooms we could have any subject in, whether it's math, social studies, world language, English, seem to present a problem for us. So if you look at these numbers, science labs sort of run the same relative to the population of the school itself. Small group instruction rooms, about the same, sort of relative to the size of the school itself. Specialty rooms, when you look at this, I think a number on our school, for our school sort of jumps out, okay, compared to the specialty